I
Nice.
resonate with the idea when you say it is either an adventure or it's nothing, or I'm dying. Like I was riffing off with somebody recently about 50 Cent's album title. What is it? Get Rich or Die
Get
Trying.
rich or die trying. Yeah.
Right? I think it is profound. Die trying is
Yeah.
such an interesting idea. And I was
Yeah.
just like, bro,
Yes.
you need to understand this. Like I was going off of that. So
Yeah. That's true.
I think the adventure audial articulation that you just did, right? A life that part of me probably ate up the idea life has to be an adventure. And therefore the audial is something I wouldn't settle for, is resonant with me. So thank you for doing that. But
Awesome.
I'm curious as to like how is it that you see Twitter? Like when I think of YouTube, I think of YouTube as my personal microphone. I go on YouTube, I'm like, hello, listen to me, here is what I have to say, and I leave. I mic drop and I walk out. Right? And so for me, it is not a social media. I'm not trying to really get popular or anything. What I'm trying to do is do my thing. Right? And I'm like, can one see Twitter as a journaling platform of some nature? And the reason why I asked this question is because I think up until now, we've been thinking of social media as an extension of the physical space. At this point, I think it is no longer viable to think of social media as an extension of the physical space. It is a digital space separate from physical space. And the case that I would make for it is something like this. Now, recently, with the whole thing, that the Black Lives Matter thing that's happening in America, everybody started doing this hashtag Blackout Tuesday thing on Instagram. Within a few hours of that happening, everybody jumps on, is like, what are you doing? You're drowning out relevant information. And what seems to be the case is that what would have worked in the physical plane of real life, which is solidarity through mass agreement, does not seem to be a viable rule on social media, because that has different consequences. The dynamics of communication are different. It acquires, like, there is a differential set of rules between the digital and the real. And we figured out the rules for the real, but we are so bent on the idea that the digital is an extension of the real that we aren't figuring out independent rules for the digital. And I think some part of you intuitively has, in some sense. I think some part of me intuitively, everybody intuitively kind of sort of gets it. But we haven't really sat down to be like, why is social media psychology not an academic discipline already? Why can I not quote tweets in my academic papers already? Like, why are we so deluded that Twitter does not exist? It's bloody real. You see what I mean? Some of the most interesting thoughts I have are not from reading Kant. And Kant is nice. I like reading him, right? Yeah. I have them. I get it from Eric Weinstein's Instagram, YouTube page. Oh, so sorry, Twitter page, right? I see him articulate something like that, and I'm like, fantastic, bro. Like, so you see what I mean? And I just genuinely think that this divorce that you have, you did not take the vestige. You were like, Twitter is a different world. Stop telling me it's just your political opinion kind of a space. Yeah. I do me there. Like, so is there something in that direction that you've kind of sort of figured out that I haven't or the world hasn't?
I had dinner with Eric Weinstein, by the way, in May last year, and it was because of Twitter. It was because I had Twitter friends in San Francisco who liked my tweets, and they wanted me to. So, like, one of my friends, Mason, she was organizing a dinner with a bunch of people, and Weinstein was there. A couple of other people, Sam Harris was there, Mark Andreessen was there. It was like a pretty. And they're all normal people. That's the interesting. I was kind of surprised. I don't know what I was expecting.
I've hung out with Eric once as well, and I think he's a fantastic man.
He's a very, very articulate, and he has a very deep knowledge of history. Like his history reference game is really off the hook. Like having dinner with him once made me want to go home and read more history. And that's the thing that's the crazy. Like, it's not like I feel like I have homework, or it's just you've witnessed somebody else and they are able to mention historical references in conversation. You're like, wow, that is so cool. It's so relevant. It's so interesting. It's so used. Everyone at the dinner table is enjoying, all these relevant nuggets of information. And like, I could do that. Like, the only reason I haven't done that is because it didn't occur to me that it would be worth my time to do it. But like, if I'm going to be meeting interesting people for conversation, then it's worth studying history. And then if I'm doing it to impress my friends, along the way, I may learn something that helps me, right? So it's like this beautiful virtuous cycle of all the cool things that can possibly happen. But like, so you're asking about Twitter. What was it again exactly? Like, how am I seeing it differently?
So like, what is it that, like, how I described how we can no longer see it as just an adjunct to real physical space, that it is a sort of a space unto its own self, right? Do you have you sort of had an understanding of Twitter, something like that? Like, do you see this as a public text messaging, I see Twitter as a hive mind discovering itself, for instance. That's a hypothetical.
Sure.
Right? Like,
I think there are many valid models that you can use to model Twitter, and it's it's infinitely complex. So there's like you can have 1,000 different models that are all correct in describing Twitter. How I think about it, I think there was a quote from, I'm not sure if it was Steve Wozniak, somebody who said when he was a child, he decided to become a ham radio operator, which is like that manual radio set that
casual
on
radio
the actual
sets.
Yeah, and it works on it's free, and it works on the actual radio frequencies. And you can use, he's a child, he's like maybe 10 or 11, right? And he builds it with his dad, he gets his license, and then he calls it, I'm not sure if the story I'm remembering is correct, or if I'm like adding details myself.
You might be, because I think I've kind of sort of heard of this story as well, but please finish.
Vaguely, yeah, I might be confusing it with something else, but like, just imagine even if it's a fictional story, like the resonance is real, which is, imagine being a child about 10 years old, and then you put together a bunch of physical, you buy this box with screws and bolts, and you put it all together, then you press the button and say, hello, I am, Visagan, I'm Prakhar, or whatever, I'm so and so. Is anybody there? And then the captain of a ship out at sea, maybe like a navy, like the captain of a ship says, "Hi, this is Admiral so and so from the U.S. Navy, and I hear you. What are you doing?" And then the kid's like, "Oh my God, fuck!" Like, it's like this little this toy, right? This thing I'm playing with has just made me an equal with the admiral of a navy ship, of a whether it's a destroyer or aircraft carrier or whatever. Like, you're both speaking to each other as equals. I think Jim Carrey has a story as well. When he was a kid, he liked a TV show on TV, and then he wrote like a letter. He's like a 7-year-old kid or whatever. Right? He writes a letter. "Hi, I'm Jim Carrey. I like your show very much. Thank you for whatever." And then they send him back like it's like the response to fan mail, and it's kind of like, it's probably formulaic. It's like, "Oh, thank you for your letter. We appreciate it. Here's some stickers, whatever." And then the letterhead says like the TV show, and then it's addressed from Hollywood. And at 7 years old, he's like, "I got a letter from Hollywood." It becomes the most precious thing to him, right? And it's that feeling of, previously I was alone. Previously I'm some unknown kid, and here I am in correspondence with the greatest of the greats in the world, right? And I feel like the internet for me has always been like, there has been that promise of that. And Twitter is by far the most direct. You can literally mention anybody. You could mention Tim Cook, right? You could mention the president, whatever.
Right, yeah.
Right? You can. I mean,
well, be careful with that.
Yeah. So those, so presidents and CEOs, like those guys, the super top 0.1%, they might not respond, but like the top 5% or so, they are more likely to respond than you might think, as long as you put in the effort to tell them something or ask them something that they think is interesting. So a thing that I've always believed is that, so I've always thought like there is a certain injustice in the world, like, and it's a very teenage angsty kind of private thing, which is like, I'm pretty smart, I'm kind of smart, I'm kind of cool, I like me, my friends like me, right? But why is nobody introducing me to important people, why am I not, and so I've always believed that, and because I used to read all the books, and I have all this knowledge, and I feel like, and I would watch videos of I don't know, man, like just I would see like paparazzi harassing a celebrity, for example. I'm like, that's such a shitty experience. Like, they're famous, but they're getting harassed by nonsense. I'm like, I'm sure the celebrity would like a really good friend. I'm sure they still have space in their lives for a really good friend who is, who's respectful, cares about them, understands their work. It's not like a crazy fanboy who's like, "Oh my God, you're so great, I worship you," but more of like, "Hey, I read your book. These ideas are really cool. I think you would also like that book, and like that kind of thing. Like, and because I also feel like I have always appreciated any effort anybody puts into having a conversation with me. Like, if they put in the effort, if it's not just some random, whether it's a fanboy or a hater, like those people are like, they don't really care who you are. They just like the idea of you. But if they like your work and they engage with your work, I've always believed that every creative mind is fundamentally playful and wants to play with other creative minds. I've always believed this. And so, like, when you have Twitter, I guess how I think about it slightly differently is that I don't see it as it's a general space. I mean, it is. So it is a general space. It is the public commons, but I think of it as I have the opportunity to shoot my shot, to be connected with some of the greatest people in the world. And that's the real game that I'm playing. So, even when I'm tweeting, and they would have mutual friends. So are you familiar with David Deutsch?
No.
So David Deutsch is kind of so some of the I'm guessing some people who like Taylor would also like David Deutsch. He's a physicist based in the UK. He has a book called The Beginning of Infinity, and he's like just this pretty highly respected author / lecturer who talks about like advanced physics, and he talks about like theory of knowledge and how to advance humanity and how blah blah blah. Like a lot of people are really into his ideas. And I did a book thread about his book. I do a lot of book threads. I have like 50, 60, maybe 70 plus book threads now, where I read a book and then I tweet about the book as I'm reading it. Like, oh, this is an interesting quote. This is an interesting point.
Insane. Good idea. Right.
I do it all the time. And there have been at least 3 or 4 instances where someone retweets it, or I don't know if the authors search for it, but the authors find the book threads and they reply and they say things. And turns out I have a mutual friend with David Deutsch, and they introduced us, and they set up a video call, and I did a video interviewing the author of a book that I read, who's like, and I say interview, but actually when I presented it to David as an idea, I presented it as a conversation. And because I knew again that he must be so tired of doing all these fucking interviews where people say, "Tell me about your book. What are your ideas? Tell me about." And I'm like, "Hey, like I see you. I see that you are a curious, playful mind. I'm one of you. I'm just younger, right? And I'm not as gifted in physics, but I'm curious like you, and I have questions, and I want to know what you think about things, and I spent like the first 5-10 minutes of my call talking about myself, which most people would think some people would think it's disrespectful. They're like, why are you wasting this important person's time with your life story, right? And some people, and you can go and look up the video yourself on YouTube, and there are people in the comments who are like David Deutsch fanboys, and they're like, who gives a shit about this interviewer that nobody knows? Like, fuck off. Like, I'm here to see David talk. Like, cut the crap.
Right.
But I don't care about them, you see. I care about David. And I want David to have a good time having a conversation with me. And for him to have a good time having a conversation with me, he has to know my context. Like, he has to know where I'm coming from. And like he referenced stuff that I said at the beginning of the call, like an hour later into the call. So he remembered. So it's not like he was, it was genuinely a conversation.
Right.
And I feel like that is something I probably can't even tweet about, because it would sound like I'm trying to show off that I'm friends with a famous person. But I'm not. I'm really, really not. I'm really trying to say it's so radical. People don't believe this is true, but it's true. The most important and powerful people in the world, some of them, they are like lonely. They're lonely because everyone's fucking worshipping them. And they're not worshipping them or demonizing them. And no one's having an honest face-to-face conversation with them about like what their stuff is. So I have found repeatedly with some of the most busy and wealthy and important people in the world that they are curious to hear what I have to say, because they know that I don't want their money, I don't want their investment or their I just want to chat about ideas. And they got to where they are because they did that. They cared about ideas, and that made them successful. And it's a kind of twisted irony that when you become successful, now everyone cares about why you are successful. And what's your morning routine? Do you drink coffee? Do you and they're like, fuck off, I don't care. Just let's talk physics, or let's talk, what's the future of that kind of thing.
You've got to challenge these guys. Yes. That's how
they appreciate it.
Right.
Exactly. And if I can get a few thousand people to understand that this is true, and they conduct themselves like that, they will then each become like nodes in their networks that spread curiosity and engagement and whatever. And just this, each person can be a network that influences the people around them. And then we can envelope the whole fucking world. And then anybody who's working on anything interesting through like this system of handshakes between friend and friend, like just information will be routed. It should already be true, but it's not happening because of like the way our social media platforms are organized and the assumptions people have about just human relations, right? Like it's all bullshit. Everything it's just crazy. It's really everybody should be thinking from first principles. What do you really want to do with your life?
Right.
Who do you want to be friends with? Who do you want to talk to? And not just because they're famous. So I like my favorite musical artist of all time is Hayley Williams from Paramore. And for a range of reasons, she has this embodiment of like vulnerability in public and sharing feelings, and she creates this very nourishing vibe that everyone involved is very supportive and all those things. And so I rehearse with myself like the conversation I would have with her. I would, and people say things like, "Oh, if you meet her, aren't you gonna like lose your shit and be a fanboy?" And I'm like, no, because I respect her so much that I don't want her to feel like she has to manage me. Like if somebody comes at you like, "Oh my god, I love you," you're like, "Oh, thanks,"
Yeah,
like,
right.
You enter that mode like, "Oh, thank you for liking my show." But I'm like, I used to read your live journal, and I loved how you handled the crowd, and I want to know, how did you deal with X? What did you think about Y? And like ask them the questions that you read all of their interviews and you see what nobody has asked them yet. And then when you ask them a really good question that nobody has asked them before, they will, they have this script, right? How to deal with all these people who want my attention. And when you give them a question that they've never been asked before, that they find interesting, they will have to stop and they'll be like, that's a good question. Nobody's asked me that before. Like, let me think about it. And then they will like you. Like I've witnessed this happening. Then they'll want to be your friend because you just introduced them. You gave them a gift. You introduced them to an area that they can play with creatively that nobody else was giving them. And we can all do this for each other. And we can all, like, your status doesn't matter. Where you are, how much money you have. None of that shit matters. It's just playing with ideas and perspectives. And even who you are doesn't actually matter, right? It can be anonymous or whatever. It's just.
Now we're back to LSD.
Yeah, basically it's.
I mean, I sense that I've stretched you enough, so I'm going to bring this to a close about right now. But I have a few things to say. Have you heard of the phrase "the reputation precedes the person"?
Yeah.
But the first time I heard that, I was like, "What kind of a life is that? Like, what's the point if what people say about me is more relevant?" Like, what happens with, and I've only recently begun to see this because I've only recently sort of started to become like a social media kind of a person where people sort of know me. And every time I get a text where somebody's trying to fan mail me, it is more difficult for me to respond because they're not addressing me as a person, they're addressing my capital as a person. And there is a difference between who I am and what my capital is. And it becomes extremely difficult. I think part of the problem of taking your personality to the internet or to the public square instead of creating a character is that the internet begins to shape your personality. And I think that might have been something like you might have felt something similar with yourself as well because you're so authentic.
I think about this all the time because so like one of my favorite acts that I've encountered recently is ContraPoints, the YouTuber, and her name is Natalie Wynn, and her show is called ContraPoints. Right. And so there's that gap between people say, "Oh, ContraPoints is trash," right? And it's like there's that gap. It's not Natalie is trash. I mean, so some people will say Natalie is trash, but most people who don't like ContraPoints say ContraPoints is trash. And she can be like, "Oh well, you don't like my work. It's not like you don't like me." Right? Yeah, there's that gap. That's healthy. And but I'm not yet at the scale where it's gonna really kind of crucify me. But I always study these things in advance. I'm always studying celebrities and politicians and famous people to see how they handle it psychologically. Because I don't think that some people will say things like, it's worth, if you have a good cause that you believe in, it's okay if you ruin your life in the process because you serve that greater good. I don't think that's I'm not persuaded by that. I feel like ultimately life is ultimately life is a journey. In the grand scheme of things, the universe is going to fade to nothing. So the legacy will be, Ozymandias, it will be sand and dust and whatever. I mean, some people have disagreements about that. They're like, oh, maybe we can reverse entropy and regardless, like, you shouldn't live a miserable life to achieve something. Right. And so it's very important to me to not be miserable. And so I describe what I do sometimes, or just the pursuit of being a public figure is an extreme sport. It's a psychological extreme sport because you are taking your ego and your personality and your identity and you're subjecting it to extreme stress. It's like like going driving a sports car, whatever. That's like the G force is on you. Right. And the thing about that kind of G force is like weightlifting, right? If your posture or your form is wrong, you're gonna screw your back. right? So it's the same, like psychologically, if you're going to be a public figure, you're going to be subjected to intense scrutiny, intense pressure, intense other people's projections. It's going to really weigh on you, and you have to take the weight and handle it properly. So I'm very mindful of making sure that I do it properly. And the most important thing for that, I think, is you have to have your own sense of values. You have to have your own sense of what you will not do, what you like. So, I have an ebook now, and people buy my ebook. And so if I tweet about my ebook, people buy more of the ebook. So, if I want more money, if right now you told me, Visa, I need you to make $100 in the next hour, I can actually do that. I can go and tweet about my book, and like people will buy it. But the thing is, if I do that every day, people will start to see me as, why is this guy just talking about his book? He's trying to sell stuff. Like he's he's like a marketing guy. So there's if I overdo that, and then I can think about what kind of controversy can I cook up so that I can sell more ebooks. Right? It's possible. I can see the path. It's like it's the low road or whatever. And a lot of people who don't have their own personal sense of values, and they don't have a vision for the kind of life they want to live, it's very easy to be like, well, more money is nice, and then I can buy creature comforts, or I can buy status or whatever. So let's just do the thing that has more money.
Right.
And then, you start, I call it summoning the demon. It's like to make money, you're willing to like create outrage or create whatever it is, even if it's just, create feuds or whatever. And you make the money, but you at the cost of your soul. And I've seen it play out in other people, and they are not happy. So you really have to figure out what it is that you won't compromise on. And for me, I think the trick is, and this is also an answer to another question that you asked earlier that I didn't mention before, which is like, you're asking about like the Black Lives Matter stuff and all that. And, there's day-to-day frictions. There's like, in June 2020, in the first week, there were protests in the States about racial injustice, and it's a tragedy and whatever. But like, I care about those things, and I want to see things get better for people, and I want to see more justice, and I want all of those things. Like you can know what's up.
Right.
I also try to have a very long view. I try to think about these things in like 100-year scale. And when you start to think about things at a 50 to 100-year scale, like what happens day to day, week to week, even year to year, doesn't really matter. Like things can go wrong. It's all right. I'm not saying that it's all right that people are struggling and losing their lives and all those things, but I'm saying something like, so like I wanted to travel. I wanted to be in New York this month, and then COVID happened. So I can't. But it's okay. It's sad, but like,
that's
it's
all
not
right.
gonna
right
because my plan is a 80-year plan. So if I can't travel for 10 years, that's fine. I'll travel in year 11. Like it's just when you have that kind of long view, it makes life a lot easier. You don't need if people are arguing with you today, or they're misunderstanding, you're like, okay, it's just I'm playing the long game. I'm not. I don't need to win this argument with you. I'm trying to win your loyalty and support over decades.
It's not important to be right. It's important to be right eventually, and I think that makes all the difference, right? And so many. I would rather not get into it, but I've seen so many people, especially on Twitter, wanting to be right so badly, they entirely miss the point of their engagement. And of the many ideas that I write down for myself, I have an entire notebook I like to keep so that I preserve how I've thought over the course of time, right? Like it's a connection with my history that I privately keep. And one of the ideas that I recently wrote down and I sort of started working on is a book called The Play Principle, which I think throughout this conversation, you in your own way have been talking about. Like, I think what you truly, I don't know if you've read about the psychological concept of play. It's sort of different from our conventional concept of play. Right. And there's the playful orientation to life in the most practical sense. That's the book idea that I was thinking about. I think you are onto that in your own sense. And I think
same.
If you document that process, which in a very meta sense, you are already on Twitter, I think that is a book that I can totally expect you to write.